They were knocking on the door like they were trying to rescue me. 5 minutes, Isabel. Someone shouted from the hallway outside the courthouse bridal suite. But I wasn't drowning. Not in water, anyway. Just in tulle and expectation. I stared at myself in the mirror. The white dress, ivory satin with delicate lace and a sweetheart neckline, was beautiful, custom-fitted, and absolutely suffocating. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. But I was gasping for air, the way someone might in a dream right before they wake up screaming. I lifted the hem to glance at my feet. Heels. For inches. I hated heels. Thomas picked them. Elegant, he had said. My chest felt like it was folding in on itself. Behind me, on the side table, sat a delicate silver brooch. My mother's. I pinned it to my dress earlier, like a gesture of approval from a woman who hadn't been alive for over 20 years. Would you have said yes, Mama? I whispered. Would you have let me give my life away just to make things easier for everyone else? A knock again. It's time. I opened the door, smile painted on. My brother adjusted his tie and said, You look perfect. Perfect. For whom? As we walked down the narrow corridor toward the ceremony chamber, I felt my knees wobble. Not from nerves. From clarity. 20 years of being the responsible daughter, the substitute mother, the one who said no to college because someone had to stay, the one who babysat so her sisters could party, who taught full-time and still made dinner every Sunday. I had done everything right, and none of it felt like my life. The double doors swung open. Guests turned. Thomas was already standing by the officiant, smiling that practiced, professional smile of his. He looked so polished, so ready, so certain. But the moment he placed his hand on mine, the weight of it wasn't warm. It was heavy, possessive, and when I tried to pull away ever so slightly, his fingers tightened like I was property. He leaned in and murmured, Breathe, sweetheart. I've got you. I smiled, but only with my teeth. The officiant cleared her throat. We are gathered here today. The words floated in the air, meaningless. I felt my pulse in my temples and my ribs. Then I heard it, my mother's voice, not from the brooch, not from the grave, but from somewhere buried inside me. Promise me, Isabel, you will live your life fully. For yourself. I blinked. The officiant was now looking directly at me. Isabel Moreno, do you take this man? No, the word left my lips before I even realized it had formed. It echoed through the room like a gunshot. Gasps. Silence. Thomas stiffened. What? I can't, I said, shaking my head. I'm sorry. I can't do this. I didn't wait. I turned and walked fast. Then I ran. I ran through the marble hallway, past the stunned guests, past my aunt clutching her pearls, past the flower girl dropping petals in confusion, out the front doors, into the dry New Mexico heat. And there, by some absurd twist of fate, was a man on a motorcycle. Leather jacket, boots, his helmet under one arm and a cigarette in the other. He raised an eyebrow as I barreled toward him, dress dragging behind me. Need a ride, he said, half laughing. Please, I panted. Just get me out of here. He stared at me for a moment. Then he nodded, tossed me a helmet, and said, Hop on. I didn't look back. Not once. Not at the courthouse. Not at the bewildered crowd spilling onto the steps. Not at the man I almost married. The bike roared to life beneath us. The wind tore at my veil, tugged my hair loose, filled my lungs with air I hadn't tasted in years. I gripped his waist not because I was scared, but because for the first time in decades I was moving, really moving. We drove for what felt like hours, though it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes. He dropped me off near the edge of town by the old arroyo. I got off without a word, handed him the helmet. You okay? He asked. I nodded. Thanks for the escape. He gave me a 2-fingered salute and disappeared into the dusk. Barefoot, I walked the last half-mile home, dust caking my soles, skirt torn and gray from dragging along the cracked desert earth. The house came into view. My father's adobe, same as it had always been. Lights off. He must have been at the courthouse, trying to salvage the scandal. I climbed onto the porch and sat down, wedding dress and all. Tigray, my old orange tabby, appeared from under the steps and leapt onto my lap like nothing was out of the ordinary. He curled against me and purred softly, his warmth grounding me in a way nothing else could. My hands trembled. My heart raced. But my lungs finally knew what it was like to fill with air. I closed my eyes and whispered into the night, "This time, Ma?" I didn't let them choose for me. And Tigray purred louder, like he agreed. I woke to the creaking of floorboards above me and a ray of sunlight stretching across my face like a silent question. For a moment, I didn't remember. Not the courthouse, not the gasp from the crowd, not even the sound of my own voice breaking through 2 decades of silence. But then I saw the mess on the floor, my crumpled wedding dress like a discarded skin, and it all came back. Tigray was still curled by my feet, one paw resting on my ankle like a guardian. His fur twitched with every snore. I sat up slowly, the worn couch groaning under me. My body ached in places I didn't expect, neck, rib, soul. What did I do? I whispered. My phone buzzed before I could finish the thought. I didn't want to look, but I did. "Martin, answer the damn phone." "Lily, are you okay?" That was insane. "Call me." "Dad, 2 missed calls." And then my brother. As soon as I picked up, his voice exploded through the line. "Are you out of your mind?" "Hi to you too, Mateo," I muttered, wiping a dry patch of sleep from the corner of my eye. "Dad nearly had a heart attack. Thomas is humiliated. Do you even realize what you've done?" My fingers clenched around the phone. "Do you?" Silence. I could hear his breathing. I said no, Mateo. That's all. I said no to a man I didn't love at my own wedding. "You could have talked to someone first. You could have thought this through." I did think, for the last 20 years. Through college, I didn't attend. Through every night, I watched your kids so you and Carla could go out. Through every single moment, I put everyone else before myself. "You're being selfish," he snapped. I closed my eyes. Good. Maybe I need to be. I hung up before I could change my mind. My hands were shaking. I dropped the phone onto the couch and let my head fall back. The ceiling fan spun slowly, creaking in rhythm with the storm inside me. Later that afternoon, Lily came by. My best friend since 3rd grade. She didn't knock, just walked in with 2 gas station coffees and a bag of sour cream chips. "I knew you weren't going to go through with it," she said, handing me the coffee like it was medicine. "You what?" She gave me a sideways glance and sat down, her ripped jeans sliding easily over the sunken cushions. "You were sleepwalking," I essay. "The whole engagement. You barely even talked about him. You smiled, but it didn't reach your eyes." I stared into my cup. "Why didn't you stop me?" "Would you have listened?" I didn't answer. The question hung in the air between us like a forgotten photograph. We sat in silence for a while, chewing chips, sipping coffee, listening to the wind roll over the desert. Tigray jumped up between us, pawing at my lap like he was claiming his territory. "You know what I envy." Lily said after a long pause, "You did something bold. You broke a script. Most people just live it out." "Is that what I did?" I asked. "Broke a script?" "You burned the damn play." I hadn't told anyone where I was staying, but someone must have let it slip. Maybe a cousin, maybe a guest who recognized the house. I didn't think he'd come after me. I was wrong. That night, I was almost asleep when the pounding started. It was violent, like someone was trying to break down the door. Tigray bolted upright and hissed, tail puffed like a bottle brush. I sat up slowly, heart racing. And then I heard it. Isabel. His voice. "Thomas, open the door. Now." Tigray launched himself off the couch and positioned himself between me and the door like a furry, low-to-the-ground warrior. The pounding grew louder. "I know you're in there. I backed into the kitchen and grabbed my phone, hands trembling. "I'll break it down, Isabel. Don't think I won't." And then the door exploded inward. He stood there, rumpled suit, breath sour with whiskey, hair disheveled, eyes wild. He looked nothing like the man I almost married. "You humiliated me," he growled, stepping inside. "Get out," I said, though my voice was barely audible. "Or I'll call the police." He laughed, harsh and cruel. "Oh yeah? You think anyone's gonna believe little Miss Perfect Thomas Green hit his fiancé?" He lunged for me, grabbed my arm, and then everything happened at once. Tigray flew through the air like a cannonball of orange fury, claws out, teeth bared. He landed squarely on Thomas's back, screeching. Thomas roared, flailing. I dove for the phone again, but he shoved me hard against the wall. Tigray clawed his neck, leaving deep red lines. Then, with one brutal motion, Thomas grabbed Tigray by the scruff and hurled him against the wall. A sickening thud, a cry. My heart cracked. I screamed and rushed to Tigray's limp body. "No, no, no!" But Thomas wasn't done. He grabbed me by the hair, raising his hand to strike, and then let go of my daughter. The voice was calm, cold, steel. My father stood in the doorway, a shotgun leveled at Thomas's chest. "Right now." Thomas froze. "Mr. Moreno, you so much as breathe wrong, and you won't leave this house standing," Dad said. "You and I can talk. Outside." Thomas hesitated, then backed off, spitting curses as he walked out. I collapsed beside Tigray, sobbing, fingers trembling as I cradled his tiny body. My father knelt beside me, glanced at the rising and falling of Tigray's chest, and said, "He's alive, but we need to go. Now." I nodded through tears. "Dad, I don't want to stay here anymore." He didn't answer, just placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "Then let's get him help. And after that, we'll figure it out." 2 days after we brought Tigray home from the vet, he finally lifted his head, just a little, but it was enough. I'd been sleeping on the floor next to his bed, one hand always resting gently on his back, counting the rise and fall of his breath like it was the only thing tethering me to earth. The vet had said it was a miracle. Bruised ribs, mild concussion, no internal bleeding. I didn't care if he walked crooked for the rest of his life. I just needed him here. But when he blinked up at me that morning, his eyes slow but focused, something shifted. Like the fog of fear started to lift. And what rose instead was something I hadn't felt in a long time. Restlessness. That evening, while the sun dragged itself behind the mountains and the desert wind carried the dry scent of sage, I sat at the old kitchen table and opened my laptop. Not with any plan, just habit, distraction. I scrolled through emails, ads, spam, an unread message from a teacher's forum I hadn't checked in months. The subject line was simple: "New position available rural school, Northern NM." I clicked. It was a small charter school near Taos, on the edge of tribal land. A full-time opening for a primary grade teacher. Emphasis on holistic learning, land-based education, and cultural integration. Housing included. Must be open to non-traditional pedagogy and local spiritual practices. I read the post 3 times, then a 4th. The words glowed on the screen like they were daring me. "Are you ready to start over?" I didn't let myself overthink it. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I typed one line: "Hello. My name is Isabel Moreno. I'm interested. Can we talk?" I hit send, closed the laptop, took a breath. The next morning I had a reply. "Hola, Isabel. My name is Miguel Yazzie. I'm the acting director of Red Cedar Primary. Would love to speak." I stared at the message. Then I called. His voice was calm, low, with a kind of quiet confidence that felt older than the phone line connecting us. "Why are you interested in this position?" he asked. I had a list of answers prepared. Something about curriculum development, trauma-informed classrooms, my years of experience. But none of it came out. Instead, I said, Because I want to finally become the teacher I dreamed of being when I was 9. There was a pause on the line, and then he laughed. Softly, kindly. Well, he said, we built this school for people who dream like that. When can you come? My hand trembled as I wrote down the address. That night, I told my family. They thought I was kidding. You're moving where? My sister, Clarissa, shrieked, holding a spoon over her baby's high chair. Taos, I said. A school near the mountains. They offered me housing. What about here? What about the kids? What about Dad? I looked at my father. He sat silently at the head of the table, staring into his coffee. Since the night he'd saved me, he'd been distant. Not angry, just tired. You don't even have your own family, Clarissa added, her voice sharp. Now you want to go play teacher in some village. It hit me hard, not because it was cruel, though it was, but because it was true. I didn't have a husband, or children, or a mortgage. I didn't even have a dog, just Tigray, still healing in the corner, purring softly like a small machine. But for once, the truth didn't wound me. It clarified me. Exactly, I said. I have nothing holding me here. And I don't want to wake up one day at 60 and realize I never left the place where my life stopped moving. Clarissa rolled her eyes. Drama. I turned to my father. Dad, I need to go, but I'll call. I'll visit. I promise. He was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded. Just once. I always knew, he said. One day you'd leave. I packed in silence. Old sweaters. My lesson binders. A few dog-eared books. Tigray's carrier. The red yarn bracelet one of my former students made me last Christmas. My brother Mateo showed up the night before I left. You really going? He asked from the doorway, his arms crossed, trying to act annoyed. You're just going to leave us with Clarissa's chaos and Dad's grumpiness. I smiled. You'll survive. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. You know, I always thought you'd be the one to stay forever. I always thought that too, I whispered. He looked down, then back up. Good for you. At dawn, I loaded the last box into the back of my battered car. Tigray meowed from his crate, clearly displeased with the arrangement. Don't worry, I said, strapping him in. We're not running away this time. We're running toward something. I took one final walk around the house. Every corner held a memory, some sweet, some suffocating. But I didn't cry, not even when I saw the mirror in the hallway, the one where I first saw myself in that wedding dress and didn't recognize the woman staring back. This time I did. I thought I knew mountains. I'd seen them in magazines, on postcards, on dusty road trip billboards. But nothing prepared me for what rose beyond the windshield as I drove deeper into northern New Mexico. The Sangre de Cristo Range wasn't just landscape, it was presence. Old, watching, alive. Tigray stayed oddly quiet in the passenger seat, his carrier tipped just slightly so he could watch the clouds drift over the jagged peaks. The air grew thinner. The sky stretched wider. Every mile felt like a peeling away of layers I hadn't realized I was wearing. By the time I pulled into the tiny dirt lot outside Red Cedar Primary, the sun was low, painting the ground in gold and ash. A woman stood waiting near the front steps, tall, straight-backed, long black braid trailing down her shoulder like a ribbon of shadow. You must be Isabel, she said, offering a hand. Her grip was firm, eyes sharper than her age. Irina, she added, vice principal. I'm here to help you get settled. She spoke with a rhythm I hadn't heard before, like her words had roots, like they belonged to something older than English. I followed her toward a small adobe-style home beside the school, its roof sloping into the hillside, windows deep-set like resting eyes. This'll be yours, she said, unlocking the front door. Nothing fancy, but the bones are strong. Inside, the walls were cool, the floor uneven, the corners filled with dust motes dancing in slanted light. A faint smell of sage lingered in the air. I placed Tigray's carrier gently by the window. He stepped out cautiously, sniffing each creaking floorboard as if the wood might bite back. Irina glanced at him with a flicker of amusement. "He'll adjust," she said. "We all do." That evening, she made a fire in the Kiva fireplace without being asked. Her hands moved with the ease of someone who knew flame like an old friend. When she was done, she stood and faced me. "You feel it?" she asked. I blinked. "Feel what?" She nodded toward the window. "This land. It doesn't welcome you with open arms. Not at first. It watches, waits, decides if you're worth its stories." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. The next morning, the cold punched through the walls like a lesson. June in the city was sleeveless dresses and iced coffee. Here, it was frost on the glass and breath like mist. I bundled in layers and followed Irina across the gravel lot toward the school. The building looked like it had grown out of the ground. Thick beams, wide windows, painted tiles woven into the adobe. "Red Cedar isn't like other schools," she said as she opened the front doors. "We teach math and reading, yes, but also language, ceremony, land, spirit." Inside, the classroom smelled of cedar and something deeper, like earth after rain. There were no rows of desks, just round tables, floor cushions, handmade tapestries on the walls, a drum in the corner, stretched tight with rawhide and ringed with feathers. "That's the spirit drum," Irina said, catching my glance. "Gift from one of our elders. Children learn rhythm before they learn grammar." I ran a hand across the rim. The skin felt warm, alive. Irina smiled. "If it lets you touch it, that's a good sign." Later, she showed me the teacher's lounge. Small, quiet, one stained couch, a coffee maker from another decade, and a window that framed the mountains like a painting. I sat there a long time after she left, just breathing, just listening. The next day was my first with the students. 15 pairs of eyes stared at me as I stood at the front of the room. Most of them dark, curious, solemn. Some smiled, others just watched. But one didn't look at me at all. He sat in the back corner, arms crossed, blonde hair too bright for this room, jaw clenched like he'd swallowed every word he ever wanted to say. "That's Jaden," Irina whispered behind me. "He's quiet. Dad's raising him. Mom left 2 years ago. He doesn't speak much. His father's Miguel, our acting director," she added quietly. "But most folks don't say it out loud unless they need to." My chest tightened. I recognized that silence. I tried not to call on him. Didn't want to press. But as the other kids shared stories, drew trees, laughed, and fidgeted, Jaden stared out the window like he was somewhere else entirely. When class ended, the kids trickled out in bursts of noise and backpacks. Jaden lingered. He didn't speak, just slipped a folded paper onto my desk and walked away. I opened it. A sketch. Rough, smudged. A mountain. A tiny figure beneath it. A cat curled beside their feet. I looked out the window, toward the peaks, then back at the paper, and something in me whispered, "This is where it starts." It started with Tigray. One night, not long after my first week of classes, I woke to the sound of him growling, a low, guttural sound I'd never heard from him before. He stood on the edge of the bed, for bristling, eyes wide and wild. "Tigray." I murmured, reaching out. That's when the floor shifted. Not a noise, not a tremble, shift. Like the house had inhaled suddenly. Like the earth had rolled in its sleep and forgotten we were still on top of it. A low groan followed. The window rattled. Books slipped off the shelf and thumped to the floor. I grabbed Tigray, threw on a coat over my pajamas, and bolted outside. Neighbors were already gathering, some in robes, others in boots and blankets, clutching flashlights and prayer beads. An old man across the road nodded at me. "Just the land greeting you," he said, calm as still water. "You're part of it now." I didn't sleep that night, not from fear, but from awe. This place didn't whisper its power. It roared it into your bones. The next day, Irina knocked on my door with a bundle of sage and a thermos of something warm and sharp-smelling. "Boil it," she said. "Drink it slow. Helps your body catch up to the altitude." She handed me the sage. "And this for the rest." "For the rest of what?" She smiled. "The ghosts. The heaviness. The things you brought with you." Inside, Tigray watched us from the window, his tail twitching. I burned the sage that night, not because I believed it would do anything, but because part of me hoped it might. A few days later, Nadia showed up. She knocked like she didn't want to be there, then shoved her way inside with a pot of something thick and fragrant. "Stew," she muttered. "You look like a scarecrow. You've been eating it all." I blinked. "Not really." She set the pot on the stove, took one look around the room, and sighed like it pained her. "That fire's not built right. You're wasting wood." She knelt, rebuilt the kindling with the precision of an old soldier. "There, now it'll breathe." I watched her in silence, unsure what to make of this sudden intrusion. She'd barely looked at me during staff meetings. Once, she muttered something about outsiders and whiteboard teachers under her breath. But now she was stirring stew like she'd raised me. After we ate, she sat back, arms crossed. "I've seen a lot of new teachers come and go," she said. "They come in all full of ideas. Holistic this, trauma-informed that. But when the winter hits, or a kid cries, they're gone before spring." "I'm not going anywhere," I said softly. She studied me, eyes narrowed. "We'll see." But she came back the next night, with bread. At school, things shifted. The kids began opening up. Questions spilled out of them. About grammar, yes, but also about why the moon changes shape, why dreams feel real, why hearts hurt when someone leaves. And Jaden started to smile. Just once at first. A crooked half lift of the lips when I tripped over a Navajo word and made fun of myself. Then, in art class, he brought me a leaf he'd painted with tiny blue symbols. "Protection," he whispered. "For your cat." I pinned it above my desk. But it didn't last. One afternoon, while reviewing spelling journals, the classroom door slammed open. A woman entered, tall, striking, lips painted a shade of red that looked expensive and deliberate. Her heels clicked across the floor like gunshots. "I'm looking for Jaden Yazzie." She didn't introduce herself. She didn't need to. The resemblance was unmistakable. "Hello, Veronica," I said, standing slowly. She blinked, surprised, then composed herself. "I'm his mother." Jaden had frozen in his seat, his hands clenched into fists on the desk. "Jaden, sweetie," she cooed, walking toward him. "Mommy's here to take you for the week. Just us. A special treat." He didn't move, didn't speak. I could see the terror beneath his silence. "Is that okay, Jaden?" I asked gently. He nodded, but his body said something else. Veronica turned to me. "So you're the famous Miss Moreno." She looked me up and down, took in the room. The drum, the leaf. The leaf I hadn't realized she was staring at. "I heard you've been involved. With my ex-husband. And my son." Her tone was ice, with a sugar rim. "I care about him," I said carefully. "Both of them." "I'm sure you do," she replied, grabbing Jaden's hand. "But let's remember whose son he actually is." She left in a flurry of perfume and judgment. That night, I sat on the porch, Tigray in my lap, the leaf from Jaden fluttering slightly in the wind. I couldn't stop thinking about his face when she took him. Not angry, not scared, just gone, like he'd folded himself up and disappeared into the tiniest corner of himself to survive. I whispered into the dusk, "Come back to me, Jaden. When you're ready, I'll be here." And Tigray purred like a promise. He came back 3 days later. I was shelving books in the reading corner when I looked up and saw him standing silently in the doorway, backpack slung low, hair messy, cheeks wind-chapped. Jaden didn't say anything, just walked to his seat, pulled out a pencil, and started writing. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. When the class ended, and the others spilled outside for recess. He stayed behind, waited until the room was empty. Then he walked over and placed something small and smooth in my palm. A stone, dark gray with a single white vein curling through it, like lightning. My dad says this kind helps with sadness, he said. I think maybe you need it. I stared at the stone, then at him. My throat tightened. I tried to speak, but no words came. So I just nodded, closed my fingers around the gift, and whispered, "Thank you." And in that moment, I knew something had changed. Not just in him, in me. That evening, I ran into Elia at the local store. She was standing in front of the tea section, manicured fingers tapping against her shopping basket. I tried to move past without a word, but her voice found me anyway. "You really made yourself comfortable here, didn't you?" I paused, not because I didn't expect it, but because of the venom in her tone. "Elia," I said carefully, "I don't want to fight with you." She stepped closer, eyes blazing. "You don't belong here, Isabel. You waltzed in, took my job, took my place, and now what? You think you're part of this community because you teach their children and burn sage." I felt the heat rising in my chest, but I didn't raise my voice. "I didn't take anything from you," I said, "and I didn't come here to replace anyone." Her jaw clenched. "You think he loves you, don't you?" I blinked. "Who?" "Don't play stupid." For a moment, we just stared at each other, and then something in her expression cracked. The anger softened just enough to let the pain show through. "I was there when Veronica left," she said. "I helped Miguel pick himself up. I sat with Jaden when he cried himself to sleep. I was there." "I believe you," I said gently. "I know you care." She looked away. "Then why you?" I wanted to say I didn't know, but that wasn't true. "Because I didn't try to be what he needed," I said. "I just was." She didn't respond, just turned and walked away, her shoulders stiff, basket swinging by her side like a weight she couldn't put down. At school, whispers started. Parents stopped making eye contact. Children began bringing talismans, woven thread bracelets, salt pouches tied with ribbon. One little girl handed me a carved stone and said, "My grandma says this will protect you from the spirits you brought." I thanked her and added it to the growing pile in my drawer. I knew where it came from. Veronica was back in town, and she wasn't subtle. She accused me publicly of manipulating Miguel, of bewitching Jaden, of corrupting the classroom with spiritual nonsense. She even called for my removal during a school board meeting. I was ready to pack my bags. Again. But Nadia stood up. She rose slowly during the meeting, cleared her throat, and said, "I've been teaching here for 40 years. I've seen many come and go. But Isabel Moreno? She stayed. She stayed when others would have run. And these children, they listen to her. They trust her. Because she listens back." The room fell silent, and I didn't cry. Not until I got home and found Tigre curled around my shoes, his orange fur warm against my skin. That night, Jaden ran away. He showed up on my porch at dusk, cheeks flushed, arms wrapped around his knees. "Mom's busy," he said, voice flat. "She's been on the phone with her new boyfriend for hours." I sat beside him, pulled a blanket over our shoulders. "Does your dad know where you are?" "He's at the office, talking to Irina. I heard them say your name." I looked at him. "What did you hear?" He hesitated. "That mom wants to take me to Phoenix. That she found a lawyer. That she's going to win." The wind picked up. A lone coyote howled somewhere in the hills. I tried to steady my breath. "She's going to do what she always does," he whispered. "Take me somewhere, then disappear." I reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. "I'm not going anywhere, Jaden." He looked up at me, eyes shining. "Dad told me he loves you." I froze. Then I nodded. "I love him too." He held my gaze. "Then I'm okay if you become my new mom." I smiled through the tears. "Only if you're ready. No rush." No pressure. I'm ready. And in that moment, under the desert sky, a child who had never chosen me did. Winter came like a hush, not a blizzard, not a storm, just a quiet settling of white across the land, like the sky itself had exhaled. The mountains turned soft at the edges. Footsteps crunched like secrets. The air grew thin and holy. Miguel started coming by in the evenings, always in silence, always with something in his hands, firewood, dried herbs, a book he thought I might like. He never asked to stay. He just did. Tigre loved him, which meant everything. One night, I found Miguel sitting at my kitchen table with a carving knife and a block of cedar. I watched as he whittled slowly, fingers sure and steady, shaving pieces into curls. "What are you making?" I asked. He didn't look up. "A box. For the children's offerings. So the spirits don't feel forgotten." When it was finished, he handed it to me. Simple, sturdy, smelled like home. I placed all the charms and protection, tokens the kids had given me inside, one by one, as if honoring something sacred. Jaden visited after school most days, usually with Tigre trailing behind him like a tiny guardian. He brought sketches, questions, sometimes just silence, and I gave him what I could. Time, space, a steady presence. Veronica didn't win. Despite her threats, her lawyers, her declarations of motherhood and intent, the court ruled in Miguel's favor. Stability mattered. So did truth. And love, real love, however messy, found a way to speak loudest. She left town the following week. Miguel and I didn't celebrate. We just sat in the quiet, a candle flickering between us, Tigre asleep at our feet. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded. "She'll come back, but we'll be ready." There was no triumph in his voice, just peace. One weekend, as the snow began to thaw, he asked me to take a trip with him. "Just us," he said. "There's somewhere I want to show you." We left early, bundled in layers. Tigre safely curled at home under Nadia's watchful eye. Miguel drove the old truck up winding paths that eventually vanished into forest. Then we walked. The path wasn't marked. He led me past birch trees and frozen creeks, through silence so complete it made the world feel holy. Eventually we reached a clearing. Ribbons hung from branches, red, white, blue, green, fluttering softly like prayers. At the center stood a stone altar, moss-covered, ancient. "My grandfather used to bring me here," Miguel said. "He taught me to tie my wishes into the wind." He pulled a small strip of fabric from his pocket, handed me another. "What do I do?" I whispered. "Tie it," he said, "and ask for what your soul needs most. Not what your mind wants, what your spirit craves." I closed my eyes, feeling the wind on my cheeks. I thought about the life I'd left, the woman I used to be, the silence, the service, the obedience, the fear, and then I tied my ribbon and whispered, "Let me stay true, even when the world tells me to bend." When I opened my eyes, he was watching me, his face unreadable, but his eyes were wide open. "I brought you here for a reason," he said. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a ring. Not new, not polished, something old, handmade. The silver dulled by time, the turquoise in its center cracked slightly like a riverbed. "This belonged to my grandmother," he said. "She gave it to my mom. My mom gave it to me." He stepped forward, took my hand. "I'm not a man of speeches, but when you showed up here, something inside me started breathing again, like the land had been holding its breath until you arrived." My heart pounded. "And I think," he continued, "maybe the wind knows our names for a reason. Maybe it's been calling us toward this moment for longer than we realize." He looked down, then up, eyes steady. "Will you marry me?" I didn't cry. I smiled. Soft, steady. "Yes," I said. Not because I needed saving. Not because it was expected. Because this time the choice was mine. The wedding was small. Spring arrived with thunder and rainbows and wildflowers that bloomed out of nowhere. The children made decorations from pine cones and paper. Nadia brought stew. Jaden walked me down the path, a flower behind his ear, beaming like the sun had chosen him personally. Miguel stood waiting under the wide open sky, the mountains behind him like silent witnesses. Tigre, of course, sat proudly beside us, his orange tail flicking like a metronome. When I said my vows, I didn't promise perfection, or forever. I promised honesty, patience, and presence. That night, under a blanket of stars, as the fire crackled and laughter drifted through the trees, I sat beside the man I loved and the boy who had chosen me. And I realized this wasn't my second life. This was the first time I'd truly lived mine. Looking back, I think the most important lesson I learned is this. Sometimes life doesn't need a grand plan. It just needs one brave moment of saying no to the path everyone else laid out for you. I spent years trying to be what others expected, dutiful, quiet, agreeable, and it nearly hollowed me out. But the moment I left everything behind and stepped into the unknown, I began to hear my own voice again. I learned that home isn't always where you're born. Sometimes it's the place that finally lets you breathe. Sometimes it's a boy handing you a spirit stone, or a man carving a box with care, or a cat curling up at your feet when your world feels like it's falling apart. I learned that love doesn't save you, it sees you. And when it's real, it doesn't ask you to become someone else. It holds space for exactly who you are. And most of all, I learned that healing doesn't come all at once. It comes in seasons, in wind, in firelight, in ribbons tied to trees, and whispered wishes no one else hears. So if you're standing at the edge of something terrifying, if the path ahead looks too wild, too strange, maybe that's exactly where your real life begins. You don't have to be fearless. You just have to move forward anyway. That's what I did, and it led me home. I never thought a phone call could ruin everything I believed about my life, but that morning it did. The sun had just started streaming through the kitchen windows when I poured myself a cup of chamomile tea. It was quiet, too quiet, even for a Wednesday in Vermont. The fridge hummed gently, the floor was cool beneath my feet, and for a moment I let myself believe the world was still simple. I stood there, sipping slowly, trying to remember if I'd bought milk the day before. Michael had always reminded me about small things like that. He wasn't perfect. Our marriage had its cracks, but he was my husband. We'd been together for 7 years. We had routines, shared meals, a rhythm that I thought meant we were okay. Then the phone rang. It was one of those old landline phones with a shrill, jarring tone. I nearly spilled my tea as I rushed to pick it up. "Hello," I said, balancing the receiver on my shoulder. "Is this Mrs. Bennett?" The voice was male, formal, hesitant. "Yes," I replied, suddenly alert. My fingers tightened around the ceramic cup. "Who's this?" I'm calling from North Valley Medical. I'm afraid I have some difficult news. Your husband, Michael Bennett, he was in a car accident this morning. He didn't make it." For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. I waited for another sentence, something to soften the blow, to make it less real. But it didn't come, only silence and the sound of something sharp breaking inside me. "What?" I whispered. "No, there must be a mistake. Michael he just left for his business trip last night." "Are you sure it's—" "I'm very sorry, ma'am," the man continued, and I could tell he was struggling too. "There's more you should know." My heart was pounding. My knees felt weak. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table, the chair legs scraping across the tiles like a scream. What else?" "He wasn't alone in the car," the man said. "There was a woman. She also died at the scene." I didn't say anything. "We identified her as a woman named Erin Mitchell. We believe she was involved with your husband." A sound left my throat, dry, breathless, and unfamiliar. Not quite a gasp, not quite a cry. And he hesitated again, and I already knew what was coming, like watching a nightmare unfold in slow motion. "We discovered they have children, twin daughters. They're 6 years old. Their next of kin is unclear. We're reaching out to extended family. But we thought you should know. I dropped the cup. It shattered against the floor, the tea staining the tiles like old blood. My hand was trembling, my whole body shaking with a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. Michael had children, twin daughters, with another woman, and I never knew. The world spun. The walls seemed to tilt, and I had to grip the edge of the table just to keep myself grounded. My ears rang, my vision blurred. The man kept talking. He said something about legal procedures, about next steps, but his voice was just noise now, like static in a room that no longer felt like mine. I don't remember hanging up. I don't remember how long I sat there staring at the broken porcelain on the floor. Minutes. Hours, maybe. I only remember one thought pulsing in my head, like a drumbeat. Michael was dead, and he had lied to me about everything. How could I have been so blind? He wasn't just unfaithful. He had an entirely separate life. A woman. Children. Secrets so big they could crush me. And they did. Over and over, like waves that wouldn't stop. Eventually, I forced myself to move. I swept up the shards, tossed the tea-soaked towel into the sink, and stared out the window at the street we used to walk together. It looked the same. Calm. Normal. But I wasn't. Not anymore. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, hoping something had been lost in translation, hoping it was some cruel mistake. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Michael was gone, and the man I thought I knew had never really existed. There was a knock on the door later that afternoon. A social worker. She had kind eyes, soft words, and two terrified girls holding each other's hands behind her. They looked like little ghosts. Pale, trembling, too quiet for children that age. I knew their names before she said them, Lily and Grace. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I just looked at them, and something in me cracked. They weren't to blame. They were innocent, and now they had no one. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Not because of Michael, but because of the way Lily had looked at me, hopeful, scared, and somehow trusting. Like she was asking for something, even if she didn't know what it was. I didn't know what I would do. I only knew this. If I turned them away, I'd be no better than the lies he left behind. And I was done living in his shadow. The funeral was small, quiet, almost hollow. Michael's side of the family, what little there was of it, showed up in black suits and stiff handshakes, barely meeting my eyes. Aaron's relatives weren't there. No one claimed the girls. No one stepped forward to speak for them. It was like their parents had vanished and the world had simply moved on. I stood under a gray sky, the wind tugging at my coat, watching two tiny girls cling to each other beside a casket they were too young to understand. Lily's hand never left Grace's, and Grace didn't look at anything but the grass. They didn't cry. That was what broke me the most. Children should cry when they lose everything. These two had already learned not to. The social worker approached me again after the service. She said they could go into temporary foster care, that there was paperwork, protocols, resources that could be tapped into. But I wasn't really listening. I was staring at Lily's shoes. Pink sneakers with a tiny rip along the side. I don't know why that's what made it real for me. Not the death. Not the betrayal, but that torn little shoe on a girl who had no idea who I was. And yet, something inside me said, don't let them go. So I didn't. That evening, I brought them home. My house wasn't childproof. It smelled like lavender and old wood polish, not crayons and cookies. I had no toys, no extra toothbrushes, no bedtime stories memorized. But I made space. I cleared out the guest room, washed the sheets, and set out two stuffed animals I found in a box from when my niece visited years ago. I had no idea what I was doing, but I couldn't let them disappear into the system. The first few weeks were quiet. Lily asked questions about everything. What time was dinner? Could she have a night light? Did I know how to braid hair? Her voice was small but curious. She was trying. Grace, on the other hand, barely spoke. She watched me with wide eyes from behind her sister. She spent hours alone, drawing in a little spiral notebook I hadn't even noticed she'd brought. Her sketches were surprisingly good. Houses, trees, animals, always in pencil, always with gentle shading. She never showed them to me, but sometimes she'd leave one on the kitchen counter, folded with no name. I hung them on the fridge anyway. I didn't tell anyone at first. Not my coworkers. Not my closest friends. Eventually, word got out. A few neighbors gave me odd looks at the grocery store. One coworker whispered, "You're stronger than I'd ever be," as if pity and admiration came in the same breath. But I didn't need their understanding. I just needed the girls to feel safe. I wasn't ready to explain what had happened, or why I'd made the choice I did. The questions would have been endless. Aren't they his lover's kids? Why would you take them in? Don't you feel betrayed? Yes, I felt betrayed, devastated, hollowed out. But I couldn't punish two innocent girls for Michael's lies. They didn't ask to be born into a secret. And the truth was, I needed them too. They gave my mornings purpose, my evenings structure. My grief had been shapeless until then. Now it had hands to hold, little shoes to tie, voices calling from the hallway asking if it was okay to open the pantry. They grounded me whether they knew it or not. Of course, not every moment was sweet. There were tantrums, nightmares, silent dinners where no one knew what to say. I burned dinner more than once. Lily cried when I accidentally washed her favorite shirt with bleach. Grace got sick and refused to let me touch her forehead with a thermometer. I doubted myself daily. Was I doing enough? Was I the right person? Would they ever see me as more than the woman their father lied to? I found myself Googling parenting forums late at night, searching for answers in digital threads written by strangers who knew nothing about my life. But every morning I got up, made breakfast, brushed hair, packed lunches, and tried again. Eventually, things started to shift. Lily began sitting next to me on the couch instead of across the room. Grace started humming when she colored, small, tuneless sounds, but sounds nonetheless. They began calling me Miss Caroline at first, then just Caroline. Then one day, Grace slipped and said Mommy before catching herself. She looked mortified, but I didn't correct her. I just smiled and made pancakes. By the end of that first year, we had routines, inside jokes. Years passed quietly, each one marked by back-to-school nights, birthday candles, and scraped knees. By the time Lily turned 14, she had already started managing the family grocery list. Grace filled sketchbooks faster than I could keep up with. I wasn't just raising children. I was witnessing them become themselves. Favorite songs in the car. We baked cookies that always came out too hard. We danced in the living room to songs from the radio. I bought bunk beds with stars on the frame. They picked out their own blankets. Lily chose sunflowers. Grace picked deep green. One night, as I tucked them in, Lily whispered, "Do you think Daddy can see us?" I froze. Then I knelt beside her bed and said softly, "Maybe. But I think he'd be proud of how brave you are." She nodded, and that was the last time she ever asked about him for a long while. I still cried sometimes, alone in the laundry room with a towel pressed to my face. The betrayal hadn't vanished, but it was no longer the center of my story. These girls were, and I was no longer just surviving. I was becoming their mother. By the time they graduated high school, our tiny home was full of college brochures and part-time job schedules. Lily got into a state university with a full scholarship in accounting. Grace chose a smaller art school 2 towns over, majoring in interior design. I helped them pack, cried when they left, and celebrated every call that came after. 16 years went by before I realized just how much we had built together, not from blood, not from names on paper, but from ordinary days stitched together by love. Lily and Grace grew into young women before my eyes. They each had their own rhythm, their own voice, their own way of being. Lily was steady, focused, drawn to order and structure. She'd always been the one to check her planner twice, to color code her highlighters, to balance a checkbook before she ever got her license. Grace was her mirror opposite. Restless, intuitive, sensitive to light and texture and sound. She filled sketchbooks with color, rearranged her room monthly, and dreamed about spaces the way I used to dream about flavors. They were so different and yet both mine. They called me Mom now. It had slipped into our lives gradually, like the way winter becomes spring. You don't notice the first warm breeze until it's already wrapped around your skin. And I never asked for it. I never dared to expect it. But when it came, it felt right. I kept working, kept saving, kept the house warm and the fridge full. But I let go of a lot of things too. My dreams, mostly. I'd stopped talking about the cafe years ago. There were moments I wanted to bring it up, when I saw a vacant storefront or read about a new bakery. But then Grace would need new art supplies. Lily would need gas money for the drive home. And my dreams would quietly fold themselves back into the cupboard. It didn't feel right to want something for myself. Not when college bills and car repairs loomed. Not when late-night tutoring and office janitorial shifts filled every spare hour. Some nights, I'd pass by the spice rack and touch the glass jar of cinnamon, wondering if it still smelled the same. But I didn't open it. I didn't let myself. We didn't talk much about Michael. Not because we avoided him, but because he simply faded. The girls remembered him vaguely, like a distant relative you saw at weddings. A voice, a shadow, a vague outline of someone they might have known. I never gave them details. I didn't want to lie, but I also didn't want to pass on bitterness. But the questions came anyway. One evening, just as the sun was dipping below the maple trees out back, Lily looked up from her dinner and asked, "What was he like?" I paused, my fork frozen in the air. Grace looked at me too, her expression unreadable. Lily clarified, "Our father. I mean, you never really talk about him." I felt my throat tighten. I took a sip of water I didn't need and set the glass down carefully. Then I said the only thing I could. He was a complicated man. He loved you, but he made mistakes. What kind of mistakes? Lily asked. I looked at her face, so much older now, but still carrying the softness of that 6-year-old who once asked if I knew how to braid hair. And Grace, sitting quietly across the table, her eyes like questions I wasn't ready to answer. I could have deflected. I could have told them something vague and comforting. But after 16 years, they deserved more than that. He had another life, I said. He was married to me when you were born. I didn't know about you. I didn't know about Aaron. I found out everything after the accident. The room was quiet. So, Grace spoke at last, her voice barely audible. You're not our real mom. My heart cracked open. Slowly, painfully, I reached across the table, taking both their hands in mine. Maybe not by blood, I whispered, but I've loved you every day since the moment you walked through my door. I am your mother in every way that counts. No one said anything. The sound of the clock, ticking, filled the silence. I waited for them to pull away, but they didn't. Still, the days that followed were hard. There was more silence than usual. No music during dinner. No jokes in the car. Lily grew quiet, retreating into her schoolwork. Grace spent more time outside, sketching under the porch light or disappearing into her room without saying goodnight. I respected their space. I didn't push. I knew they needed time to untangle what they had just learned, what it meant for the lives they thought they understood. A week later, as I was chopping vegetables in the kitchen, Lily came in and leaned against the counter. Her arms were crossed, her face unreadable. "Mom," she said softly, "I've been thinking." I kept chopping, waiting. About what you told us. About Dad. About everything. I looked up. I was angry. At first, I thought, why didn't she tell us? Why didn't she just lie? But then I realized you never owed us a fantasy. You gave us a home. A real one. You've always been there, every step. That's what matters. I dropped the knife and pulled her into a hug, so tight I thought I'd never let go. The tears came fast. Relief, grief, joy, all tangled together. "I love you so much," I whispered. You and Grace, you're my whole world. Grace stood in the doorway, watching. She didn't speak, but after a moment, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around us both. We love you too, Mom, she whispered. And just like that, the silence lifted. We didn't erase the past. We didn't pretend the truth hadn't stung. But we stitched something stronger over the wound. Something unbreakable. We were a family, and that truth was ours now. The years that followed felt both fast and heavy. We celebrated graduations, endured heartbreaks, got through flu seasons and late-night study sessions. I watched Lily blossom into a young woman who could balance a spreadsheet faster than I could fold a towel. Grace turned her love for sketching into something tangible. She was now studying interior design at a small college 2 towns over. I had done what I promised. I raised them as my own. And yet, something in me had gone quiet. I still woke before dawn, made the same breakfast, packed the same lunches, and left notes on the fridge when I worked double shifts. My body carried the years, sore knees, dry knuckles, eyes that stayed open too long after midnight, but I never let them see that part. I smiled. I asked about professors and parking tickets. I saved every dollar I could. The idea of my cafe had faded into something private, not quite dead, just buried under obligation. Then one night, as we sat around the dinner table, eating Grace's oversalted stir-fry and laughing about it anyway, she put down her fork and asked, "Mom, if you could do anything, just for you, what would it be?" The question landed softly, but hit something deep. I blinked. "What do you mean?" "If you didn't have to think about money or time or anyone else," Grace said, "what would you want for yourself?" I looked between the two of them, and for the first time in years, I let myself answer truthfully. "I used to dream about owning a cafe," I said, almost laughing at the sound of it. "A small one. Cozy. Somewhere people could come and sit and feel like they belonged. I always loved feeding people, not just their stomachs, but their hearts." Lily smiled slowly. "Why didn't you ever do it?" I shrugged. Life. Bills. Timing. And then, "I had you too. You became the dream." They exchanged a look. It was subtle, quick, but I noticed. I didn't think much of it, just assumed they were touched by the sentiment. I didn't know, couldn't have known, what they were already planning. Weeks went by. I kept working. They kept smiling in ways that made me suspicious. Grace asked me random questions about paint colors and kitchen layouts. Lily started asking about recipes I hadn't cooked in years. I chalked it up to curiosity, but something was happening. I didn't realize how serious it was until one Sunday afternoon. I came home from the grocery store and found them whispering in the living room with a laptop open between them. When they saw me, they jumped, literally jumped, and slammed it shut. I laughed. "What are you two up to?" "Nothing," they said in unison. "Too fast." That's when I knew something was coming. I just didn't know how big it would be. It had started as a joke one evening. Grace sketching a fake cafe logo on a napkin. Lily running mock numbers on a spreadsheet. But slowly it became real. They set up a joint savings account. Every extra dollar from internships, scholarships, freelance gigs went into it. Even birthday gifts turned into seed money. Behind the scenes, Lily and Grace had been saving. Not just their paychecks, but their scholarships, their freelance jobs, their birthday money. Grace took on small design gigs after class. Lily helped a local bakery rework their budget in exchange for financial consulting experience. They pooled everything they had. They started scouting locations, quiet streets, little corners, anywhere within walking distance from home. They ruled out a dozen buildings before finding it. An old brick storefront with ivy climbing up the side and tall windows that caught the morning light just right. They signed the lease. Lily managed the contracts. Grace started sketching designs before the paint was even dry. It made perfect sense. Lily had always been the planner, the organizer, the one who color-coded her entire life. Grace saw the world in layers and palettes. She could make a napkin look like art. Together, they made something beautiful. They wanted it to feel like me. Warm colors, open shelves, a kitchen where the oven could be seen from the tables, vintage plates hanging on the wall, a bookshelf near the window for people who liked to read alone, a corner booth with a patchwork cushion, just like the old armchair I used to sit in after work. Everything was chosen with care. They kept it a secret for almost 4 months. I had no idea. I was too tired, too busy, too caught up in the rhythm of daily life to notice all the signs. Until one night, Lily came into my room and said, "Don't make dinner tomorrow. We want to take you somewhere." I raised an eyebrow. "Where?" "It's a surprise." The next evening, they picked me up in Grace's car. I wore my good shoes, the ones I usually saved for parent-teacher conferences. We drove in silence, both girls grinning too wide. When we pulled up in front of the building, I didn't understand. It was unfamiliar. Clean, newly painted. A soft yellow light glowed from the windows. A wooden sign hung above the door, and on it, in simple dark letters, was written, "Caroline's Hearth." I stared at it, not breathing. Grace took my hand. "Come on, Mom. Let us show you." I followed them through the front door. The moment I stepped inside, I knew this place wasn't just a gift. It was love. The air smelled of cinnamon and vanilla. Light jazz played from hidden speakers. The counter was polished wood, the shelves lined with jars of tea and fresh herbs. A small group of people stood in the kitchen, waving as we entered. Friends, neighbors, faces I knew and didn't know. I couldn't finish the sentence. Lily stepped forward, her voice shaking with pride. "It's your cafe, Mom. We built it for you." I covered my mouth with both hands. My legs felt weak. "You gave us everything," Grace said. "It was time we gave something back." Tears filled my eyes so quickly I couldn't stop them. I walked around the space, touching the corners, running my hand along the countertop, opening drawers I hadn't even asked for. The oven was the same brand I used in our kitchen. The plates were mismatched on purpose. It was perfect. "I don't know what to say," I whispered. "I don't think I've ever been this surprised in my entire life." Grace smiled. "We hoped it would feel like home." I laughed, wiping at my cheeks. "It does. It absolutely does." And for the first time in a very, very long time, I felt like the dream I gave up on had been waiting for me all along. The grand opening wasn't grand in the way most people might imagine. There were no press releases, no photographers, no influencers waiting to post reviews. It was simple, honest, perfect. The morning of, I wore a navy blue apron with my name embroidered across the chest, Caroline's Hearth, a gift from Lily, folded carefully on the front counter. Grace had arranged a bouquet of wildflowers in a mason jar beside the register, and soft morning light poured through the windows, just the way she'd imagined when she first saw the building. I stood at the door while guests trickled in, neighbors, friends, people who had seen me at the grocery store for years and never known my name, a woman who remembered me from the Parent-Teacher Association, a man whose mother I used to care for during her hospice days. They smiled, hugged, sat down quietly. The smell of cinnamon rolls and fresh bread wrapped around them like a blanket. Lily managed the register. Grace floated from table to table, adjusting vases and making sure every detail whispered welcome. And I stood behind the counter, hands trembling slightly, until someone ordered the first cup of coffee. Then I moved, and everything made sense again. It was like I'd stepped into the version of myself I had buried long ago, measuring flour by feel, moving with the rhythm of the kitchen, giving smiles with the food, warmth with every plate. I wasn't just cooking. I was offering pieces of my heart. People lingered. They stayed long after their coffee was cold. They leaned into the windows, reading, laughing, staring out into the sleepy Vermont street like they'd found a second home. That night, when we locked the doors and flipped the sign to closed, I stood alone in the center of the cafe, turning in slow circles. It was real. It was mine. And I hadn't done it alone. The days that followed moved in a quiet, beautiful rhythm. Business grew. not explosively but steadily. Word of mouth spread. Someone posted photos online, and soon we had people driving in from the next town just to try the peach scones or sit near the bookshelf in the corner. Lily and Grace worked shifts with me when they could. We were a team. Lily took over the books and logistics. Grace redesigned the menu board weekly with hand-lettered chalk. Every Saturday, they let me experiment, one new dish, whatever I wanted. Sometimes it flopped. Sometimes it sold out before noon. But they always insisted I try again. The cafe began to expand not in size, but in soul. People brought their own stories. A couple who'd lost their child came every Sunday, always ordering the same tea and sitting at the same table. A man recovering from a stroke learned to speak again over muffins and daily crossword puzzles. A group of retired teachers gathered in the back corner every Friday with card games and knitted scarves. No one ever hurried here. That was the rule. One afternoon, a customer told me, "There's something in the air here. It feels like kindness." I didn't answer. I just smiled. Because what could I say? Kindness was all we had. And it was enough. As months passed, I began to let go of the kitchen a little more. I trained a young girl named Zoe to take over my morning prep shifts. She was quick, kind, and curious. She reminded me of Grace at that age. I stepped back slowly, watched the cafe move without me, and realized it didn't need me at the center to be full of love. That was when I started thinking about the future. One evening, as we wiped down the tables and counted the last of the day's tips, I looked at Lily and Grace and said, "I won't be able to run this place forever, you know." They both stopped moving. "I wanted to stay in the family," I continued. "When the time comes, I want you two to take over, not just the name, but everything this place stands for." Grace smiled first. "We were waiting for you to say that." Lily nodded. "We've already started planning some ideas for expansion, but only if you're ready." I felt a lump form in my throat. "I'm not sure I'll ever be fully ready, but I trust you." And I meant it. In the years that followed, I gradually handed over the reins. The cafe continued to grow under their care. They added a second location across town, then a tiny mobile truck that served festivals and farmers markets. But they never changed what mattered. They kept the shelves open, the air warm, the music soft. They kept the scones flaky and the coffee strong. They kept the soul, and they kept my name on the sign. Now, I spend most mornings in the corner booth near the window. My spot, a cup of tea, a fresh croissant, a notebook I rarely write in anymore. I greet customers who don't know who I am. I listen to conversations that float by like wind chimes. Sometimes I watch Lily managing staff with a clipboard in hand. Other times, I see Grace guiding a young designer through fabric samples near the wall. I don't interfere. I don't need to. They've got it. We never speak much about how it all began. Not about Michael. Not about the secrets, the betrayal, the pain that once threatened to bury us all. But the truth is, we don't need to revisit it, because we didn't build our life on what he left behind. We built it on what we chose every day after, and that is everything. Looking back, I realize I never just opened a cafe. I built a home, not for the town, not even just for my daughters, but for the woman I had to become after everything I lost. A woman who didn't quit. A woman who learned that family isn't what you're given. It's what you grow. It wasn't just a building or a business. It was the last piece of a puzzle I didn't know I was still solving. And in this little place, Caroline's Hearth, I found not only my dream, I found the proof that love, real love, always finds its way back, even after everything. I used to think that betrayal was the worst thing that could happen to a person. That discovering a lie, especially one that unraveled everything you believed, was something you never quite recovered from. But now I see it differently. What broke me wasn't just the betrayal. It was the silence that followed, the emptiness, the question of who I would be when the dust settled and no one was left standing beside me. But the truth is, I wasn't alone. Sometimes, Life hands you a story you didn't ask for, a heartbreak, a burden, a responsibility that feels too big for your hands. But what you do with it, that's what defines who you are. I wasn't the girl's biological mother. I wasn't part of their story from the beginning, but I showed up. I stayed. I chose them every day, and they chose me back. That's what I've learned. Family isn't always something you're born into. Sometimes it's the people who walk with you through the hardest moments, who make room for your grief, your growth, and your dreams, and still stay. You don't need perfect beginnings to build something beautiful. You just need love and the courage to give it without guarantees. And if you're lucky, if you love without expecting anything in return, one day that love might come back to you in the most unexpected, beautiful way, just like it did for me.